Hello and welcome to an interior tour of this 2010 Euro Civic Type R. The first thing to note is that Euro Civic Type Rs were produced between 2007 and 2010 and were only available in a 3-door configuration. Now, although it has 3 doors, the body shell is exactly the same shape as the 5-door Civic, the only difference being the single door and the lack of a rear door. To open the door in these 8th generation Euro Civics, you push the lever behind this spaceship styled silver painted plastic accent. The inside continues with a Star Trek spaceship style theme, or since it's British, shall we say a TARDIS style theme. And that brings me on to another point. Owing to the torsion beam rear suspension and the fuel tank located under the front seats, the Euro Civic Type R has a cavernous boot for a car of this type at around 400 litres and around 1000 litres with the rear seats folded down. Inside you'll find a pair of Recaro style Honda bucket seats trimmed in Alcantara with a red cloth material. Dash layout of the 8th gen Civic, but in the hatch it's a slightly different layout compared to the sedan. In the hatch you have this extra information display on the side which displays radio and temperature information as well as the time. By the speedometer you have rev, which is a shift indicator, which has 3 pairs of 2 LEDs that illuminate between 7 and 8000 RPM, and on the right you have an iVTEC indicator, which is a light that comes on above 5500 RPM when VTEC is engaged. Below that you have in the Type R not a mystical blue halo but a red halo around the speedometer, tachometer. And when I shut the door, it will tell you whether your kids in the back have got their seatbelts on. This car features a 355mm Honda steering wheel with perforated leather, red stitching. On the steering wheel you find controls for the audio and also controls for the cruise control, which is an unusual feature for a Type R to have. And down here you'll find information and trip computer. But this car has the optional Honda Parrot style hands-free Bluetooth. You have a rearview mirror with auto dimming function, and you have automatic headlights. On the passenger door you find an extra temperature control for the dual zone climate control. Both sun visors feature vanity mirrors which are illuminated. Later model, this does have a USB jack and a power outlet and a 3.5mm headphone jack within the center cubby, which is lined in Alcantara. You have a ashtray, power outlet, and a pair of cup holders here, and a simple conventional handbrake. The action for the gear lever is not extremely short, but average for Honda cars, but it does have a nice smooth action. Since the car is warmed up, I'll give it a couple of revs. Like most Hondas of this era, the 8th gen Civic Euro has a floor hinged accelerator pedal. Note the large aluminium covered footrest, which is very well thought out, and even the spot next for your knee is padded in this car. One annoyance with the cabin is that the air vents are located slightly off to the left. Therefore you'll find they tend to blow air on your arm rather than on your face, which can be a bit annoying. The Euro Civic Type R comes with parking sensors, and the stability control can be disabled by holding down the VSA off button while the car is stationary. Like most European cars, The Euro Civic Type R is fitted with motorized leveling headlights, so you can adjust the level of the headlights by turning this dial. And it also features a start button. However, this is not a keyless entry system. You have to put the key in, turn it, and then press the start button, and you switch off the car simply by turning the key. On the door cards you find semi-soft touch material on the top portion and hard plastic on the lower portion, with the large door bins, a fairly ordinary sounding stereo which has a lot of treble and not much bass, and then both windows are automatic. You have buttons for stopping operation of the windows, you have power windows, and you also have power folding mirrors. However, they only operate when you press the button, and they do not fold automatically upon locking the car. Overall, while the cabin has an unusual and novel layout, it all works rather well. The buttons are well labelled and easy to operate, although sometimes you might get confused between the volume and the temperature. But overall, for an unusual interior design, it works quite well. Let's have a look at the rear. Since the 3-door body shell shares exactly the same shape as the 5-door, head and legroom in the rear is identical to the 5-door Civic Euro. Like most Type Rs, the Civic Euro Type R has only 4 seat belts and 4 seating positions. Indeed, the FD2 Japanese sedan also has only 4 seating positions. The rear seats are lined in the same Alcantara material and red cloth as the front seats. In the rear you'll find on both sides a cup holder and an extra speaker. First, I guess we should mention the elephants in the room, being this car's predecessor, the EP3 Civic Type R, especially the Japanese version, and the Japanese equivalent to this car being the FD2 Japanese Civic Type R. Those are both racier and more driver-focused cars. It's best to think of this as a Type R that's really a Type S. Let's set off. Good thing about driving a slow car is you can drive it flat out pretty much everywhere. First, let's talk about this car's suspension. So in the front end, it has a strut front end similar to the EP3, but with improved geometry compared to the EP3. And infamously, in the rear, this car uses the rear end architecture from the Honda Fit or Honda Jazz. Now, as Mr. Ishishima-san from Spoon explained, that's actually a very stiff architecture. However, infamously, that means this car has a torsion beam rear suspension, or basically a girder that the 2 rear wheels are attached to, and then this girder is hung off the rear of the body. What this does mean that as a hatchback, the boot in this car is absolutely huge, especially with the seats folded down. Handling wise, this car is very responsive. It has the same 13.5:1 electric steering rack, I think, as the Civic Si from this generation. So it's very responsive, but if you push this car very hard, the predominant handling characteristic is plow understeer, which is a valid criticism. VTEC just kicked in here. But I think, thinking of it as a road car, as a Type S, you rarely be pushing hard enough to feel the plow understeer. So I don't think it's a huge issue, in my opinion. Infamously, this car has quite a stiff ride. However, it's actually a lot softer than the Japanese FD2 Type R. In saying that, the ride is not that bad, but you will feel every little ridge and every little pothole in the road, and you'll notice that roads are bumpy that you never noticed were bumpy before. Let's talk about the drivetrain here. So this car is exactly the same gearbox as the Japanese Type R, the same ratios, and in the later models and the Championship White editions, these cars have the same Torsen LSD as you would get in the Japanese Type R. What's different is the engine, being a K20Z4 engine, which is a lower tuned, lower output engine compared to the Japanese Type R. Interestingly, this engine has what's called the RSP intake manifold, which has longer runners compared to the intake manifold you get on the Japanese Type R in this generation, and it's tuned more for mid-range torque. So out of all the K20 engines, this one is biased more towards mid-range torque to give a little bit more drivability. To add to the slow car fast theme, this car really feels lively and comes alive at speeds within the speed limit. Whereas you might find in a lot of faster, more capable cars, they don't really come alive at speeds within the speed limit. And so they're not necessarily as fun for a road car. The great thing about this being a fairly slow car is that in first gear, due to the relatively low power and high weight, you actually have traction. So you can go right up to 8,000 RPM, even in first gear. Performance-wise, these engines are rated at 147 kilowatts, and realistically they dyno which is 200 horsepower, but realistically they dyno at between 205 and 210 horsepower, which is not really enough for this car's 1340 kilogram heft. What it does mean is that you can really get stuck in, since perhaps it's more fun to drive a slow car far than to drive a fast car and barely scratch the surface. It's a lot of fun to go up and down the gears. This car has very short gearing, which I'll now demonstrate. The top of first gear comes up at just 60 kilometers an hour, while second gear tops out at just 90 kilometers an hour. That means you can really make full use of that full RPM band within the legal speed limit. For a stock exhaust, the exhaust is relatively loud, and I think it makes quite a good noise. These international model K20 engines have a 4-into-1 header, which I think gives a slightly nicer sound, less of a bumblebee sound than the 4-into-2-into-1 header, which is the more sophisticated header that's on the Japanese model Type Rs. Let's see about this meager 200 horsepower. Second lip. Some people might say this car makes a lot of noise and doesn't really go anywhere. However, despite its meager 200 horsepower, it really is quite a sweet engine, especially having the balance shaft. It's one of the smoothest K20 engines. Brakes and steering, and the lack of feel in the brakes and steering, are probably the first thing you might notice if you're jumping in from some other sporty car. About the steering and controls, while the EP3 had the gear lever on the dashboard, the gear lever in this car is still quite close to the steering wheel, only 355 millimeters in diameter, so nearly as small as most aftermarket steering wheels. Unfortunately, the seating position in this car is quite high, And as the seat comes forward, it travels up, which is all very sensible for ergonomics, but those who want a more sporty low seating position, they might be annoyed by that. One annoyance that perhaps more experienced drivers have with this car is that there is rev hang programmed in, which is that when you lift off the accelerator, it takes a long time for the RPMs to drop, which you wouldn't expect because this car actually has a lightweight factory flywheel, only 4.8 kilograms. But unfortunately for emissions purposes, that rev hang is programmed in. And so if you try to change gear too quickly, which you might be used to from older cable throttle operated Hondas, you'll find that you can't change gear quickly in this car smoothly. For some people that's a deal breaker. Another annoyance with this car can be a relative lack of brake feel. It's just a single piston sliding caliper, the same brakes you get in the S2000 on the front or the Civic Si 8th gen. But there's not a whole lot of braking feel compared to what you might get with a fixed caliper rather than a sliding caliper. If you think of this car as more of a Type S, it has a lot of kit that you don't normally expect to find on a Type R, and that's not really consistent with the stripped out lightweight Type R ethos. So if you think of it as a Type S, in this car you've got automatic rearview mirror, automatic dimming rearview mirror, automatic headlights, heated side view mirrors, dual zone climate control, a lot of and cruise control, a lot of features that these hardcore Japanese model Type Rs don't have. In terms of the direct competitors to this car, I guess you could count about 5. There's the Ford Focus ST, or XR5 Turbo in Australia. There's the Mazda 3 MPS, or Mazda Speed 3, the first generation Speed 3. There's the Golf GTI Mark V, which was the direct rival to this car and is in the similar price range. There's the Renault Megane Sport 225, and there's also the Holden Astra or Vauxhall Astra VXR or Opel Astra OPC. All of those are turbocharged, and to varying extents they have a much more mid-rangey power delivery, as in most of the torque comes in the mid-range, especially in the Focus and the Mazda. So if you want a naturally aspirated car that you can really wring its neck, the Honda is really the only choice, either this car or the EP3. Unfortunately, after this generation, the 8th generation, the high-revving K20 went out of production, be it in this Euro Civic Type R, the Japanese Type R, or the American Civic Si. At least the American Civic Si continued with the 2.4 litre, producing similar power but with more torque. However, in Japan, Australia, Europe, we were without a model for quite some time until the 9th generation Type R came out, which is still fundamentally based on this architecture of this 8th generation, but that 9th gen Type R was a completely re-engineered Type R model. The great thing about this car, I think, is that it feels like you're going faster than you are going, which for a road car is probably what you want to stay out of trouble. You basically want to be able to have fun within the speed limit, and that's what something like this car provides. And then it's a relatively comfortable and practical car as well. Thanks for watching my video on the 2010 Euro Civic Type R. I think I can say this is a car with character. At least they've been bold and tried something new in the styling. And overall, as a styling statement, I think it works quite well. Although this car does have some flaws, such as being relatively slow and having a somewhat rough ride, overall the character does somewhat make up for it. Common problems if you're looking to buy one of these cars are in the early 2007 and 2008 builds an issue with the third gear synchro mesh. So check that the car goes into third gear smoothly and that issue has been remedied. And also a common issue is problems with the door rubbers around the windows with problems with rust at the door rubbers at the top of the door frames and also across the top of the windscreen. Other than that, there aren't any real major common issues with this car. Thanks for watching. Bye.